Hey guys, this is Justin. Hello and welcome to another video. We've got an interesting one today, I think. I decided I would take a look at viewer questions, choose one to answer, and today's comes from Amy. If you want your question answered in the future, make sure you leave it down below, by the way. But Amy asked, what system of government did the UNSC from Halo have before the Covenant War? This is an interesting question because there actually is a surprising amount of content in the Halo universe set before the Human Covenant War. In fact, two of my favorite Halo books, The Fall of Reach and Contact Harvest, have major portions set before the Covenant are even discovered to exist. So the first thing to know is that the UNSC, which is technically the military arm of humanity, wasn't nearly as influential before the Covenant invasion. They essentially assumed power during the war, but pre-war power rested in a civilian organization, the United Earth Government. As the name would suggest, the United Earth Government was in control of not only Earth but also her colonies, which you may not be surprised to learn ended up being somewhat controversial. So I'm going to answer the asked question about the specifics of how the government was laid out quickly, then I'm going to spend the rest of the video talking about what life in the Halo universe was like before the war, in the colonies and Earth itself. The UEG was a representative democracy headed by a civilian president, and as far as I'm aware, the UEG technically represents all planets, although obviously not equally, with Earth having an incredibly privileged and arguably totally dominant position in the galactic state of affairs. There was most likely some sort of parliament or other legislative system where each colony would elect representatives, maybe based on population size, and the executive would have also probably had individuals dedicated to managing certain portions of space, maybe even governors or other on-planet officials as well. It's unclear to me how much autonomy individual planets have, and hopefully a Halo book examines that in the future. Human faster-than-light travel was facilitated through the Shaw Fujikawa slip space engine, which was only invented less than 2.5 centuries before the beginning of the Human Covenant War. So, unsurprisingly, humanity was still in a relatively early state of exploration by the time of the invasion. Still, humanity was also spreading extremely quickly, with upwards of 800 colonies, hundreds of those being on planets, others being on moons and space stations, with various degrees of success and complexity. Typically, planets were defined by their proximity to Earth, with the inner colonies generally being much wealthier, successful, and politically important, and the outer colonies often serving, even unwittingly, as farms or resource collectors for the quote-unquote more important planets. You will have heard of many of the very important planets outside of Earth. Reach was the first extrasolar colony, and was also one of humanity's most productive and important worlds. Reach also had perhaps the largest settlement of humans outside of Earth, but still housed less than 1 billion people. This is sort of representative of the fact that slip space opened up so much room for humanity to grow, but that the seeds they had set down in these colonies were still relatively young. On the other hand, one of the most distant planets, if not the most distant from Earth, was that of Harvest. The book Contact Harvest actually gives a good look at what living within the UEG was like, specifically what interstellar travel was like. Harvest was isolated and was a 6-week slip space journey from the nearest human world, Madrigal, and over 2 months from Reach, which itself probably would have been a couple of weeks from Earth. Harvest was so far away from the rest of humanity that it wouldn't have been considered normally, but the conditions for life were so perfect, and it ended up being one of humanity's major agricultural producers. According to the book, it alone fed the population of at least 6 other worlds. If you read the novel, you can learn how much of this was done through automation. There were major AI on the planet, one specifically for farming. There were several space elevators as well, and it's pretty impressive how Harvest was so productive despite only having a population of a few million people. As an aside, from an out-of-universe perspective, some of the early Halo lore when it came to the size of the UNSC or the UEG wasn't necessarily consistent. Contact Harvest, for example, says that the planet was founded in 2468 and the 17th colony world, which I don't think really makes sense. Anyway, back to in-universe, humanity was capable of terraforming planets, but in the early years mostly did minor alterations and would simply look for other locations to colonize instead. But we do know from the Fall of Reach that things like weather control were used to make planets more habitable and simply more pleasant to live on. Going back to Harvest, the success of that planet was a bit of an anomaly. It was not only incredibly productive, but also a good place to live. That wasn't always the case when it came to the outer colonies. Many of the outer colonies were less pleasant places to live, many were overcrowded or simply on worse planets, and and many of the colonists felt like they were subject to the overbearing reach of Earth and the inner colonies generally. As you also might expect, the outer colonies would eventually outnumber the inner colonies, leading to the beginning of the insurrection. The insurrection would start peacefully as a protest against Earth's authority, but would also quickly turn violent. We never see the insurrection really at its ultimate end state in the books because of the Covenant invasion, but in the years prior, things had gotten extraordinarily bad. This is covered in Contact Harvest, but especially in The Fall of Reach, with the following quote, which explains how the Spartan program was actually envisioned as a savior of humanity. Not from the Covenant though, from themselves. I have been over the Oni projections of outer colony stability 3 times, Doctor. Their conclusion is correct. Massive rebellion within 20 years unless drastic military action is taken. And you know the drastic military action the brass would like. The Spartans are our only option to avoid overwhelming civilian losses. This sentiment of the UEG's eventual collapse is one echoed by several characters throughout the book. It doesn't seem like it's a maybe thing. Tensions and even conflict in the outer colonies are described as being so volatile that without a miracle they'll snowball into full-scale open civil war. There's another quote in the book which I think well describes it. Yes, the UNSC needs every man and woman patrolling the outer colonies. Between the raiders and insurrections, it's a wonder it all hasn't fallen apart. Indeed, Lieutenant, ever since we left Earth's gravity, well, we've been fighting one another for every cubic centimeter of vacuum from Mars to the Jovian moons to the Hydra system and on. To summarize, it seems like overall some colonies did have their issues, and that life in the outer colonies was certainly worse and under the thumb of Earth, but that the greatest threat to humanity overall was simply internal tensions, something that sort of naturally came away as the Covenant showed up and required humanity to bind together to stand a chance of survival. When it comes to Earth itself, it seems like conditions on the planet weren't awful. Overcrowding was less of an issue on Earth than it was in some other sci-fi franchises due to the ability to settle on another colony, but it still housed a significant portion of humanity's population, with 10 billion humans on the planet itself, representing, depending on the numbers you believe, perhaps 1/4 of all of humanity. But guys, that's all for today's video. I hope you enjoyed this look at the UEG, the UNSC and Humanity pre-Human Covenant War. Is there something I missed? Is there a Halo book you think that covers the topics I discussed better than what I mentioned? I look forward to reading all of your comments down below. And just a reminder, guys, I know I haven't been doing them as much lately, but if there's ever a question you really want to see answered like I did in this video, or sometimes I throw them on at the end of other shorter videos, leave it down in the comments always with the hashtag AskEck. I ask you to put that because I can go in my YouTube comments, search that hashtag up, and instantly find every single question. So until next time, guys, be safe, have a good one, and may the Force be with you.